Good morning, brothers and sisters in Christ. Shabbat Shalom. Today is Saturday, March 16th. It's 9:36 a.m. and I thought I'd do a little teaching of my own on Purim. People keep saying that the 3 days, 19th, 20th, 21st, or whatever, 20th, 21st, 22nd, represent the fast, Esther's 3 days of fasting. But I think what they mean is feasting. So I would like to go over the story of Esther for those who don't understand it, and for the people that don't understand how our Lord and Savior could come on such an insignificant Jewish holiday. I've read that in comments. And I thought, okay, they don't know the story of Esther, and I bet several of you that are newer probably haven't gotten to read it either. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to read it, part of it, a good bit of it. I'm skipping chapter 1. I'm going to summarize it up. The king threw a banquet for 7 days. Lots of drinking, but he made an order, no compulsion. Each man can drink or not drink whatever he wants. Queen Vashti did the same, called the women in. They had a party too. 7 days is a long time to be partying, y'all. But she was tired. She went to bed. She went to her chambers, and he decided he was all nice and merry and had lots of wine, and he wanted to show off his beautiful queen and had his henchmen go to get her, or whatever they were called, the people by his side. Well, she refused, and they decided they can't have that. They can't allow her to refuse the king, because that would set an example for all the women in the land, that they could start, telling their husband, no, I'm not going to do that. So he banished her from his royal palace and said, I'm going to find someone better than her. Okay, we're going to take it with that up to chapter 2. Let me get a sip of water. Esther 2, verse 1. And I'm in the English Standard Version. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. So I think it's saying he was kind of sad that he had done that to her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the citadel, under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young women who pleases the king, the young woman who pleases the king, be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, or Shimei, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is, Esther, the daughter of his uncle. So they were cousins. for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel in the custody of Haggai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred. That is, she did not let people know she was a Jew. For Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, I'm going to pause here a minute and say, okay, she had to prepare for 12 months. And I just wonder if there's a significance to that. From 2018 to 2019, the same. Well, it's just that I was thinking, weren't we so sure last year? Maybe we were just called to prepare. I don't know. It's just a thought. All right. After being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. To make them smell good, you know. Verse 13. When the young women went in to the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into the royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. Wow, Can you imagine? Now, when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai, just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Chapter 3. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Here we go again. Those Israelites were not going to bow down to any man. Good for them. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And when they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen to them, they told Haman, in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. Oh, that pride can really get you, can't it? But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So, as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, excuse me, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews. Now we're coming to the part why there had to be a 3-day fast. Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. And earlier in chapter 1 it said, and his kingdom was great. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, they cast lots before Haman, day after day, and they cast it month after month, till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Why they casted lots? Well, we're fixing to find out, I guess. I can't remember. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents," which says This was about 75 pounds or 34 kilograms of silver. Ah, silver. There we go again with that silver buying blood, right? Paying for the blood of somebody. I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries. So the king, okay, if it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands. Okay, so he's bribing the king basically. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you. Okay, that confused me because I thought Haman said he was going to give 10,000 talents. But the king said to Haman, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with them, the Jews, as it seems good to you. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. And so whatever the first month is, after Adar, is Adar the first month? See, I don't know the months. I'm not good at that. I'll have to look it up. Okay, the 13th day of the first month, and an edict according to all that Haman commanded was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces, and to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script, and in other words, in their own language, and every people in its own language. He just said that. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instruction to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. Okay, gotta pause there a second. When is the month of Adar? Kaddish in month Adar. Okay, let me go to Jewish Hebrew calendar. That's what we want. Okay, this is talking about all the different feast days. I thought it would be a calendar. My apologies. I should have thought of that before I started. To annihilate all the Jews, young and old, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. Okay, now, chapter 3, verse 14. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel, and the king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. Chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. So apparently Jews weren't the only people that did that. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, which makes me, I was wondering, why didn't she just go down there herself? But she was the queen. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man, excuse me, she sent word to him, Mordecai, to say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law: to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to this kingdom for such a time as this? Have we been called to do what we were called to do for such a time as this? Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai. That was Esther 4:14, in case you wondered. Esther told them to reply to Mordecai. Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Chapter 5. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is it? What is your request?" "It shall be given you, even to the half of my kingdom." Where have we heard that before? Even to the half of my kingdom. When that daughter, Herodias married Herod, she had a daughter, and the guy wouldn't harm John the Baptist, even though he did arrest him. And the mama had that girl dance for Herod for his birthday. And it pleased him so much that he said, surely he was drunk. He said, "Ask whatever you want, even to a half of my kingdom." She goes to her mama and says, "Mama, what should I ask for?" She said, "Tell him you want the head of John the Baptist on a platter." Which grieved the king, because he really didn't want to hurt John, because I think he really kind of thought he was a holy man. But anyway, he had to do it, or because he couldn't back down on his word. So he had John the Baptist beheaded. I'll just throw that in, no extra charge. All right. So he says, "It shall be given you, even to the half of my kingdom." And Esther said, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther has asked." And so the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your wish? It shall be granted to you." "And what is your request?" "Even to the half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." Then Esther answered, "My wish and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." And Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart, because he'd been invited to eat with the king and the queen 2 nights in a row. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Boy, what a braggart. Then Haman said, even Queen Esther let no one but me come with the king to the feast she prepared, and tomorrow also I am invited by her, together with the king. Yet all this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, his wife now, Zeresh, and all his friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. This idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. Chapter 6. On that night the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told Bigtha and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs, or he had told about how Bigtha and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold, and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. If you look that up, it's pronounced more harsh. It's a hard word to say, but I'm going to say it the way I'm saying it. And the king said, what honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? The king's young men who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And now the plot thickens. And the king's young men told him, Haman is there, standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? And Haman said to himself, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? Pride before a fall, man. It's pride cometh before a fall. Moving on. Esther 6, verse 7. And Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. He's thinking it's him, and all this is going to happen to him. Ha ha ha. Then the king said to Haman, Hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned. Don't you know that frosted him? So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning with his head covered. Poor Haman. Yeah, it's what you get. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Poor baby. Then his wise men and his poor baby is not in the scriptures. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. We had to go sit and eat with a Jew. What did he know? Yeah, he had to know. He had to know. Anyway, on to chapter 7. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. Then Queen Esther answered, If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we have been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, Who is he? Where is he? Who has dared to do this? And Esther said, A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. And the king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking, and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? As the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, Moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house 50 cubits high. And the king said, hang him on that. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated. Chapter 8. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. For Esther had told what he was, that he was her uncle. So that made her a Jew. That's what she told him. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. And she's already had the fast now. She's fasted so she could go see him. He said, come on. He raised the scepter. He went into her. Okay. 2 nights they had the meal. Now this. Okay, so keep that in mind. Esther rose and stood before the king, and she said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred? Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. So they can't take back what he already ordered. All right? That order has to stand. So here's what Haman did. Haman's dead. Mordecai. The king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. So a lot of time has gone by. Sounds like. Some of y'all are really good, with the calendar business. Figure that out. Put it in a comment. I'll pin it to the top. How about that? All right, the king's scribes were summoned at that time. In the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews, to the satraps and the governors and the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia. That's a good long way. India to Ethiopia. 127 provinces. To each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. A tit for a tat, wouldn't you say? Sort of. More like you're allowed to defend yourself if anyone comes at you. Okay, verse 12 of chapter 8 says, well, it's actually a very long sentence. Okay, let me back up then. You can destroy, kill, annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods on one day throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus on the 13th day, of the 12th month. So it's in the future. All this killing was to take place on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, the 13th. A copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all peoples. And the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So the couriers, mounted on their swift horses that were used in the king's service, rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command. And the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them. Buddy, I'm trying to read a story here. Hush! Did you get that? People that were not Jews declared themselves Jews? Buddy, hush! All right. Chapter 9. Now, in the 12th, buddy, come over here and sit. Come here. Okay. It's Saturday, visitor's day. Not knocking at my door. Now in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and the edict were about to be carried out. Buddy, hush. Sit down. Sit down. Be good for mommy. Be good for mommy. Sit. You're sitting. You're a good boy. Good boy. That's my good boy. He is sitting. All right. Let's start that over. Now, in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, On the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and edict were about to be carried out, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. Okay, the murdering and the killing and all that, defending themselves, took place in Adar on the 13th day. All right. The Jews gathered. You see why this is a big deal? The Jews could have been wiped out that day had Queen Esther not become queen, had she not obeyed Mordecai. None of this would have happened. Oh, my battery's low. I gotta hurry up. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen on all peoples. All the officials of the provinces and the satraps and the governors and the royal agents also helped the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai had fallen on them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For the man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. In Susa, the citadel itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, and also killed Parshandatha and Dalphon and Aspatha and Paratha and Adelia and a bunch of names, more names. The 10 sons. Get to verse 10. The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha. Buddy, please. Enemy of the Jews, but they laid no hand on the plunder. The 10 sons of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, okay. In Susa, the citadel itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. This one, that one, this one, that one, this one, that one, that one, this one, that one, and the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. But they laid no hand on the plunder. So the 10 sons were not hung. They were killed in this slaughter. That very day, the number of those killed in Susa, the citadel, was reported to the king. Oh, wait on that thought about the 10 sons. And the king said to Queen Esther, in Susa, the citadel, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and also the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what further is your request? It shall be fulfilled. And Esther said, if it please the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow also to do according to this day's edict, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows. So even though they were slaughtered, they were still hung. So the king commanded this to be done. A decree was issued in Susa, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. The Jews, if I am misunderstanding that, y'all read chapter 9 and tell me if it doesn't read that way to you, because I just read it to you. It was this person, that person, comma, 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 and the 10 sons of Haman. Okay, I'm going to move on. At any rate, they were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa gathered also on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they killed 300 men in Susa, but they laid no hands on the plunder. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also gathered to defend their lives, and got relief from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of those who hated them. But they laid no hands on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar. And on the 14th day they rested and made that a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day and on the 14th, and rested on the 15th day, making that a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore, the Jews of the villages who live in rural towns hold the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day for gladness and feasting, as a holiday, and as a day on which they send gifts of food to one another. So it is the 14th day of the month of Adar. And Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obliging them to keep the 14th day of the month of Adar, and also the 15th day of the same, year by year. He made it a law, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies. Now I'm starting to lose my voice. I'll quickly find where they called it Purim. The Jews accepted it gladly. Okay. Verse 24. For Haman, the Agagite, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast that is, cast lots, to crush and to destroy them. But when it came before the king, he gave orders in writing that his evil plans that he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Okay. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the term pur, which means to cast lots. Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter, and of what they had faced in this manner, and of what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obligated themselves and their offspring and all who joined them, that without fail they would keep these 2 days according to what was written and at the time appointed every year, that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, in every clan, province, and city, and that these days of Purim should never fall into disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of these days cease among their descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew gave. Okay, see, this is where it's weird how they put a comma. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew gave full written authority, confirming this second letter about Purim. So I may have read that other sentence wrong about the 10 sons, okay? Letters were sent to all the Jews and in words of peace and truth, that these days of Purim should be observed at their appointed seasons, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther obligated them, and they had obligated themselves and their offspring with regard to their fasts and their lamenting. The command of Esther confirmed these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in writing. I think that's the last chapter. No, but that's where I'm going to end it, at the end of chapter 9. Okay, so that, sorry about that. That is why the Jews celebrate Purim to this day, or at least they're supposed to. It is not a little thing that Esther saved the Jews. And this is about the longest video I ever made, but I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. Okay, I'm going to plead the blood of Jesus over this video teaching or Bible reading, whatever. I hope you enjoyed it. I plead the blood of Jesus over each and every one of you and all your devices, and I say bye for now. I'll talk to you later.